Okay, welcome everyone to the March 16th JupyterLab weekly call. Today we have about 15 people on the call, and if you don't like that number, blame daylight savings. Let's see, we already have some things in the agenda, but if you would like to present something or raise an issue, please add your name and a bullet point to the agenda. And with that, let's get started. The first person is ... which means the first person is actually Alex. You're up.
Yeah, just 2 points for me. I'll go for the second one first. I'm not sure who's active on the JupyterLab Git project currently. I know Frederic is. Is anybody else currently active on there or like doing a review on there? Just wondering, because I'm getting some asks from our client to fix some bugs and issues, and I want to know who to ping for review when I start opening those. I
can tell you I'm the only one, because I'm also mentoring two students from a American project. They are doing some bug fixes and feature implementation right now, also for a client of that institution. So I'm just as a mentor. It's not officially through Quantstack, so I'm the only one maintaining it lately. Like by lately, I mean for 2 years, something like that.
Okay, that's good to know then. And then my other bullet point is a follow-up to last week. We talked about adding a plus button to the tab bar to open the launcher, and I did that. I was interested in knowing if anybody wanted to see a demo. Otherwise, the PR is there and ready for people to try. If there's interest in a demo, I can pop open a demo right now.
I'd love to see a good demo.
Oh, interested in a demo. Okay, let me share my screen then. We'll just share Safari just to be safe. Okay, is everybody able to see my JupyterLab?
Yes.
Yep.
Cool. And everybody can see that there's a pretty plus button here now. So yeah, when you click it, it opens the launcher. It also opens the launcher specifically next to the current launcher, which is the same functionality as any other button. You can also make multiple sections. And when you click it, it will open in the area it's expected to.
Fantastic. This is great to see.
It floats and it fits at the end. So I have to say thank you. I forget who it was, but somebody implemented this in Lumino last May. So this was much easier because of that.
How does this how does it behave if you reorder tabs?
It will always put it next to the currently active tab.
Like you can't click and drag the plus button, can you?
No, the plus button.
Okay, but it's as you reorder tabs in a given panel, it's all the plus is always at the end.
Yes.
Got it. Awesome.
The plus is not actually in the list. They are two. The whole list of tabs is a sister DOM element to the plus.
Okay.
Which is why getting this to float to the tab side was actually took some work with some styling, because by default it actually just always sits over here on the right.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. That's why I was asking. Is it's really subtle and beautiful. Love it. Thank you.
So, and it has highlighting. So just like any other tab, when you mouse over it, it highlights, and it looks, actually, in my opinion, it looks even better in dark mode.
If you toggle simple on the bottom left, does that mess anything up?
It shouldn't, because it's just attached to the tab, so there's no tabs here.
Super cool.
Yeah, essentially any tab bar that is created in the doc panel, which is this main area section, will have that button. But if you create a tab bar anywhere else in code, so like if somebody has an extension and they create a tab bar, it won't be included by default. The launcher extension specifically enables it for the doc panel. So if you don't install the launcher extension, the button's not there.
Question,
Yeah.
will the plus button appear if someone deploying JupyterLab has swapped out the launcher plugin with their own?
It depends on how they wrote it. If they extended the current implementation, then it should work. If they completely overwrote it, then it will disappear.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful.
The only thing I'm wondering about is like hotkeys for changing tabs. If it, somehow conflicts with that. I'm just a quick Google says Control Shift bracket.
I don't use hotkeys, so let's see.
Yeah.
Shift bracket.
I think, yeah, so that moves left and right. And then I don't know what the one for creating a new tab is, but I mean, it looks working.
Yeah, I don't think there is a, I don't think there is a new tab button.
Is there a command that is invoked when you click the plus so that if someone wants to later on add a keyboard shortcut or put it in the command palette or in the menus or something?
This plus button is essentially this plus button. It does exactly the same functionality. In fact, it actually calls the file editor wrapper for adding a launcher if that wrapper exists. The file, it's not file editor, the file directory widget has its own new launcher command that it adds that wraps the launcher command and sends it with the current path. So if somebody ties the current path into some tab in here, it works. So when you click this button, it first checks if that command exists and it uses that one first, rather than using the generic open new launcher command. So it's literally the same as this button, which is what I was shooting for.
Sweet. Thank you for showing this off. This is great.
How do you get it to stop sharing now? There it is. Okay. Yeah, so quick demo for everybody. That PR is linked in the notes if people want to go try it for themselves and review it.
Okay. Frederic, you are up next.
Hey guys, it's just to mention that there is the performance meeting after this one, and that's all. Thanks, Isabella.
Well, that was short and sweet. Thank you. Piyush, you are up.
Hey everyone. So I have a small PR about a new concept called data set and data registry. This is an attempt to create a new interface called data set and a data registry, which will let you manage data sets. So I didn't know exactly where to open it. So I have created just a temporary repo in my alias for this. It has 2 files only right now. It has all the concepts for this, the interfaces, and it has user stories for the dataset and data registry. So feel free to comment on that PR. I can move it to a new repo if there's a more appropriate place for this. And I can share and talk about it a little bit if you want.
And just to clarify, some of what we're hoping to get input on is Piyush is basically continuing the work that Saul Shadowbrook had originally done on the existing data Explorer data registry for JupyterLab. At this point, it's more or less a complete rewrite. And so we're not clear, should Piyush just submit a PR overriding that entire repo? Do we archive the old one and pull a new one in? That would be a new sub-project, or what? We'd like guidance on these questions.
Is that repo, is any author of that repo currently active? It seems to me like maintaining version history of a thing that is a natural successor is preferable to clobbering it and losing that history unless there's no one there to merge it in, basically.
Darian, are you saying you would want a PR to that repo that has the diff, or an actual separate repo?
Oh, I would propose a PR. Nick,
Okay.
what are you thinking?
I mean, as usual, when it comes down to things that are very advanced use cases that drastically change a bunch, like, can it be an extension first so that people can try it next to their stuff without having to work off of a fork or whatever, right? Like, there was a lot of interest. I briefed right after you out at NASA about, related stuff, and people were interested in the data registry, but they couldn't really try it next to the other things that they were interested in because it was off on this fork, and you had to go through a rather involved thing. Like, can it be an extension first that people can try out?
Yeah, it is the way it's the implementation right now. It is an extension, but we just wanted to lay out the concepts initially to get some feedback. I do have the implementation. I can post that as well. It seems like, Darian, you're saying that I should put this on a PR on the same original repository, right?
That's my intuition. I'm not prescribing unilaterally this. If other people have other ideas, we should be open to it. But my intuition would have been, yeah, open a PR against the extension that already exists, maybe even bump the version so that it's clear what's happening here, and just release a new version of the extension.
Okay, sounds good. Brian, do you have any other questions?
I don't think so. It may help to open a Team Compass issue about this to, make sure that we're being transparent and that other people can comment as needed.
All right.
So I'm looking, we're talking about the JupyterLab Data Explorer extension, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people I see in the commits, there's Saul and Athen who are not here. There's Max who often is here as the third person, so maybe he'd have input. I don't know if Ryan Henning comes to these calls ever. And then there's Tim, Brian, and Vidar. So it seems like there's at least some people pretty active still who know something about that and would be capable of weighing in if you ping them on a PR to that repo.
Okay, sounds good. I'll do that.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
Isabella, you are up next.
Hey there. I try and go through the needs triage tag as has been requested every now and then. Last week, that led me to a question about how to cite JupyterLab. I'll link it in the chat. And I thought we had some kind of citation guide or some way we like to be cited for JupyterLab specifically, but I couldn't find one. And I wanted to check if that was me just not finding it this time, if I was totally unaware we didn't have something. There's some patterns in other projects. And if we don't have something, I guess, like, what do you think our next steps? Are there opinions on this, or do we not care? So, yeah. So I guess first question is, do we have some kind of standard way for citing JupyterLab?
Is there an original Fernando paper or something?
I really thought we had one on the docs. Oh, go, Brian. Sorry.
Yeah, I can give background. This is one of those things that is on all of our very long personal and corporate your community to-do lists. Our intent was always to write a paper. I forget, what's this journal that's focused on software artifacts? JOSS, Journal of Open Source Software. Lorena Barb has been involved. It's super simple. It's basically like a one-page markdown document in the repo, and then a submission process, quick review, you get a DOI. So it's always been our intention to do that. We've never done it. There's no, like, Fernando, myself, any of the other original people involved in creating JupyterLab have not written a paper. And so Isabella, is your need to cite JupyterLab urgent?
I don't need to cite it. I'm just trying to answer someone's issue.
Then
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I would say the current answer today is that there's not an official way of citing it. If we want to take an action item, I think it would be for us to write a JOS paper, which is a pretty simple thing. We did this for Altair. Jake Vanderplas and I did it for Altair, and it was a few hours worth of work. It was straightforward.
There might be an intermediate step. It looks like GitHub supports a standard I hadn't heard of before called CFF, where you add a file called citation.cff to your repo, and it's a recognized way of creating citable open source software or software packages. I don't know about this, but one potential action to fix that issue could be adding a citation.cff file to the JupyterLab repo, if that is actually appropriate for the task at hand. Again, I don't know this. I think CFF stands for citation file format. I'll link the page about it in the notes, but I can't vouch for it. This is just like literally what I looked up while we were talking about it.
Oh, thanks, Darren. I've never seen that before.
Yeah, me neither. I'm not vouching for this at all. It just seemed interesting, and it seemed like if there's built-in support, maybe that's like a good intermediate before publication.
Another potential intermediate is I noticed, because I looked around what other projects are doing. I think what Binder Hub does is they cite one of like the early talks that they gave. I don't know if there's any talk someone would want cited, or I mean, I know there's some blog posts. I don't know if that's better or worse. So that's why I'm bringing it up.
Yeah, hold on, let me, as we talk, Jupyter has somewhere a document that describes an approximate process to write papers like this. And I think part of the issue is, for example, early talks on JupyterLab would have been given by myself, Fernando, Steve Sylvester, Darian, Jason Grout, etc. But these days, we should not be the only ones being cited in an author list on JupyterLab. That would be a complete gross misrepresentation of what's happened. And so I'll look up the document that Jupyter has describing the process of how we would build an author list for a paper that's as inclusive and representative as possible.
I linked the Binder one because that's what I thought too when I checked, and it's funny, the author is just Jupyter, even though the talk was definitely given by specific people, I think. But I could be misunderstanding. I don't have the same academic background as a lot of you, but I thought it was an interesting approach.
Isabella, do you want to open a team composition on this for us?
I actually was thinking that I would, yeah. Awesome. But I thought I'd ask here first, just in case there was an easy answer that I just couldn't use the documentation properly. So thanks.
No, thank you.
Cool, thanks. This was interesting. I didn't know about a lot of this stuff. It's a good set of conventions that seem to be arising around it too.
Yeah, I thought there would be an easy answer to this issue, so I knew that was my first wrong step, right? So yeah.
I just pasted the link to this document in the Jupyter governance about writing papers related to Jupyter.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Nick, you are up next.
Oh no, I forgot what I wrote. I think I had a couple things that I put down.
Webpack,
yeah, right.
Lab4O, yeah.
I'm on it. I found it. Okay. So we are using file loader and URL loader and some other loaders that are not actually compatible with Webpack 5 anymore, apparently. Or they're not compatible with the newer style loader. I don't know, whatever. But I ran into a bunch of trouble replacing those with the new asset stuff. Does two cool things. One, you don't need to do as much weird loader stuff. Two, it doesn't even parse those files, so it actually makes the build faster. So if we were not webpacking, if it never even opened the JSON files, if it never even opened whatever files, that might help the build performance. So not on 3, because people rely on those versions of those loaders and how they're configured and everything like that. But on 4, we should definitely try and lean as heavily as possible on the asset stuff. So I just figured this out last night, so I haven't made an issue or anything like that, but Jeremy said that we should talk about it upstream. And I know everybody loves Webpack problems because they're the best. The other one, there's an issue open on JupyterLab server about what to do about the Lsp handlers. Should we start thinking about how to bring those into the house? And I got lots of opinions because I don't think there's a right answer, but I just wanted to point that out as a place for people to weigh in if they have users that are using Lsp. We have a lot of people using the JupyterLab Lsp stuff, and really not that many people actually like contributing back other than help me with my language server problems, right? So it would be super helpful if we got some feedback on how we might eventually bring some of that stuff into core. Or if we never want to touch it because we don't trust Microsoft, which is also totally valid. And we don't need that inside of our code base. That's also fine. Those are just 2 issues.
So what are these opinions that you have? What with being informed, it's helpful to hear what you think should happen.
Well, I mean, like I originally, for example, when the new YJS thing came out, it's just a brand new WebSocket hanging out there, and it only lives on the JupyterLab server, right? Or it's in JupyterLab. It's not in JupyterLab server. Maybe that's part of the problem, right? So when we introduce stuff on a Leaf package that ties it forever to that implementation of that server, and it lives in the open API space of that server, much to our discussion on the previous hour, it makes it harder for other Jupyter clients to make use of that without also upstreaming the server. If instead we can move stuff into the specification space within Jupyter, so for example, hey, I got this WebSocket over here, it's called comms, I can run it next to the code of interest down the pipe or whatever, then all of a sudden the implementations can use existing stuff that they already have and they don't have to implement things. So I would love it if it was possible to run language servers inside the kernel. I would love it if kernels were able to emit language server protocol messages. So like there was a discussion last week about completion documentation or something. LSP has already destroyed that message space. I mean, it's got like 20 different things that you can say about completions, way beyond what we have. And it doesn't say experimental JupyterLab completion icon or whatever, like there's cruft inside of our messages, right? I would rather we could just embrace and extend those LSP messages rather than having to iterate on the Jupyter server, on the Jupyter kernel messaging space forever, if there is a path forward where other clients can make use of that, technique. And then the other one is, if we wanted to actually ship anything like a useful IDE experience that had jump to reference and refactoring and lookup definition and all that, that means we would have to then grandfather in something, we'd have to pick a language server that worked with something we had. And I'm really not comfortable with that right now because it's, again, the one that seems to be any good is not open source, right? The Pylance whatever from Redmond. So we can't distribute that, right? And then we can't really trust the Palantir one. So I don't know, it's hard. There is an open source one now. It's a fork. It's got its own baggage. I don't know, whatever. So it's a hard to pick one there. But we do know, for example, that we care about JSON. Even if you only care about settings, you care about JSON, you care about JSON schema. So if we could ship in browser language servers that JupyterLab didn't know that it was in the browser, that would be great. So we could ship the JSON language server, we could ship the YAML language server, because those are Jupyter things that we have to deal with. But at the end of the game, what will it mean when you are working with a polyglot document and there are many sources, not just one language server, but there are many sources of annotations that are interested in the layers of what you have there. So it might have a link checker for your markdown is one kind of thing, and your spell checker can work on your markdown, but it can also work on comments inside your code, etc. Like, there isn't really a model like that today because most of the LSP clients work with a line and column based source document. There isn't a lot of examples out there of I'm looking at a polyglot hypermedia document that is also computable and has outputs that might be relevant. So, you know, we've got many directions that we could go. I think we need to go in all of them, but getting something in first is probably better. So those are my opinions, and I've laid them out on that issue there. But I'm really interested to hear if people are actually pushing LSP on any of their clients and what their experiences have been.
So what do other people think? And just I can't imagine Nick accidentally said embrace and extend when talking about Microsoft protocol. But anyway, what do other people think about this? This is a really attractive feature set. I'd like to see how we can get it out to more people, and I'm curious what other people's thoughts are. So
yeah, I feel bad because I just hop back on in the end of Nick's explanation because I was dealing with some emergency here. But we've had some discussions earlier with Nick about where do we elect the LSP protocol, like whether we make it, try to make it part of the Jupyter kernel protocol or like as a separate thing. And so just wanted to add one thing. So rather than, contradicting or whatever, because I haven't heard everything. So we, LSP is one of the main points of focus for our team at the moment. So we have Chung, who's been presenting the new completer that was merged in JupyterLab. And now he's making changes in JupyterLab LSP to update it to use this new completer and like learning from it. So we definitely want to sort of have like core support for this in JupyterLab. So I just wanted to second that from Nick.
it sounds like the same way we had a JEP for adding the debug adapter protocol to the kernel. That's probably a good model for adding LSP. And that way we don't have to deal with the problem of, okay, but what language server do we ship? We're just talking about a messaging spec, which is, as I understand it, one of the approaches you proposed and the one you advocated for, Nick. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. I mean, the specific one, the MVP that I built was there is a kernel that takes over the role of bespoke WebSockets. So the way that LSP works right now, it's a server extension, and it adds some new routes, and they're named on the server or whatever, and it spins them up when they need them, so that we didn't have to, we didn't have it only has a RESTful API. It doesn't have a controller-based WebSocket API, right? So it's kind of like the existing kernel sessions. It's almost exactly like the existing kernel sessions, except you just have one Python session. You just have one LaTeX session, one Markdown session. And there's a lot of limitations with that, where you're expecting the code to be co-located with the server, and all this stuff breaks down entirely when you get to Jupyter kernel gateway and stuff like that. So I want there to be some way that you can run kernels next to language servers on the same file system, and it's hard. As well as running local servers, it's got to be really easy to get it stood up. So I'm not sure about adding a whole other set of WebSockets to core. that already require some other extremely complicated piece of software to run next to them. Nobody has success running these language servers out of the box, you know. So whereas we're heavily invested in making kernels work. So I don't know. I feel like if IPython started, you know, or IPyKernel started putting out language server messages that would start getting people into a cooler space. Thank you, Sylvan. Save me, save me. What am I even talking about?
No, it's just it's the one thing. I tend to agree with you, but most of the time, but about electing the LSP protocol as part of the kernel protocol, this is where I think I disagree. So we discussed this in the issue. I don't know whether anyone posted the issue link here at all, but to me, kernel and LSP are very orthogonal. Kernel is about execution, and most of the time when we leaked the information to the kernel about what what client we were using, whether it was a notebook or a console, we considered that it was an abstraction leak. So we tried to make the kernel completely unaware of any notion of document, while the LSP is really about the documents and about the entire workspace. It's a global thing where you may have many Python kernels running in a given environment. Most typically you will have only one language server for that environment. So the abstractions don't really align to me. And so in my opinion, the debug protocol really worked well with the kernel protocol, but not LSP. So what I'd like to see, and I think having a new WebSocket is fine. I mean, we have a WebSocket endpoint for YJS, you know, for real-time collaboration, and we have a WebSocket endpoint for kernels. And now we may have another one for, you know, language servers, right? Probably if we make a simple one available, I don't know, for JSON or some other simple language, as an example, that may be a win. And so we don't get into the game of, you know, trying to pick the right one for Python, but I don't really have a problem with adding new WebSocket endpoints.
Okay, this is something that I guess a good takeaway from the conversation would be, do we need a JEP to move forward on this, or is there a way of adding these endpoints just to the next version of server because it's a major version change and that's it? Like, if we're not imposing anything on the kernel spec, if we're simply adding endpoints, it seems like a natural thing to do in the next version of server without going through a formal like ratification process. Do you have an intuition on that?
Well, it's terribly specified. It's got a schema, dude, and there's nothing wrong with that. So
it looks really nice, but it's not so nice.
No, I know. It's a hard problem too. I would really like to see something that worked in browser. I think that JSON fellow running inside the browser that could already make, even though we just got our brand new awesome settings editor, but making schema constrained JSON editing better would already move things forward, right? You know, that would start getting us thinking about more of these schema related things that are language agnostic and all that kind of stuff. And if that machinery was flexible in a way where one could add a client, a server based thing, you're going to have to install that server, right? Like, to your point, yeah, we shouldn't even try and pick a working Python one, and we shouldn't write one either. Good Lord. So I feel like there's, you know, some opportunities for getting some of the features and using the features for simple non-executable documents to kind of get our feet wet before going to all of it working really well. Yeah, they're doing a good job on Python LSP, but man, that was a really painful experience over the last couple of years, right? Like, I know they're doing a good job, and I know a lot of people are invested in LSP, but individual servers are really hard to pick. We grandfather in IPyKernel on JupyterLab, and that's what most people expect to get. I don't think there is a clear front runner on which one we say, like, if you download JupyterLab, you're also going to pull in this, right? Like, you know, it's hard to pick at this point. Whereas there's really only 1 or 2 JSON servers because there's only so much you can really do with it. So I don't know. I would love it if and it wouldn't, you know, it could be on a dot release, right? It could be 3.4 or whatever. If we had servers that weren't backed, just in-browser servers, so that lab extensions could use the vast collection of existing JavaScript-based ones that are based on the reference implementation, which is really the only way to start a language server, right? Like if you don't have a building block set and all of the languages have had to build them because the machine spec isn't machine readable. We got some more opinions here. Yeah, Pyrites lockdown, difficult to customize. Yeah.
So are you worried about it? Are you worried about it from a security perspective or like a bloat and configuration and dependency perspective?
Yes. I mean, you know, people talk about LSP being safe and it's like, not really. Only some of the language servers actually work without code execution. I mean, they need access to a lot of stuff. But more of it's dependency bloat, right? That's the thing that gives me the most nightmares is, you know, you kinda install whatever JupyterLab today, and you are pulling stuff from all over the universe, right? Like it is very large. And so I'm very hesitant to add any of those because they're usually very tightly tied to the language grammar, you know, all that kind of stuff. Whereas JSON, we kind of understand what that is. We already have AJV in the browser. That's like the primary dependency of the language server for JSON.
I mean, we know that autocomplete is like a major issue, and it's an IDE, so load it.
Hodor, there we go. So anyhow, yeah, I don't know. There's I would like us to get the UI of the language server stuff squared away before trying to make it work. Like we have to do insane things, just like DAP does, to get notebooks working inside of a random language server. And that is very painful. And it doesn't understand things like, I don't know, it doesn't like, how would you autocomplete on if you're in a markdown document, how would you autocomplete on what attachments are available, right? Like a language server would have no idea how to do that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know, that more insights there than just me and Sylvan shouting at each other, and any stories that people have about how LSP is helping or frustrating their users is kind of what we're looking for there. And
Yeah,
what
so
is missing from the experience.
look in the chat. There's a lot of really good stuff in there, but also I think we should take up this conversation in tomorrow's Jupyter server call as well, because I think actually a first move toward bringing these features to core is the endpoints, and then a second move is writing the wrappers for those endpoints in JupyterLab services. So why don't we continue the conversation there, unless there is something that someone wants to add right now? Okay, cool.
Well,
Thanks.
I can throw a little thing at it, and maybe it's relevant to the previous NB7 thing. You know, really Jupyter Server Proxy and LSP Server have many of the same requirements. And originally, the LSP stuff was built on top of Jupyter Server Proxy, but we needed more control and stuff like that. So maybe Jupyter Server needs to be a general purpose process manager with streaming logs and start and stop and, you know, environment variables and all that stuff. I don't know.
I'm going to say that's outside the scope of the JupyterLab call. Maybe though. I'll bring it up tomorrow. I'm sure it'll be real lively. Okay, so let's see. Jeremy, you are up next.
Oh yeah, a quick one. we published a blog post yesterday about Jupyter Lite, and blog post is called Jupyter Everywhere, and the whole point behind this was just to show people how they can embed their own Python console on their website. That's something we demoed at the community core a couple of weeks ago. And since then, we made a bit of progress on this. So Martin worked on the Things extension to also embed it, to be able to embed either the full JupyterLab UI or just a notebook UI based on RetroLab in your Things documentation. And we expect people adopting that more and more. And why I'm bringing it here is because it's completely relevant to JupyterLab, because everything almost is based on the JupyterLab stack. And thanks to Nick, we've done a lot of progress on the light side. And yeah, and if you want to give it a try, check out the blog post, because we try to make it as easy as possible for you to, or for anyone to use it. That's it.
So this is super cool. I don't know if you've seen it, but now people are embedding JupyterLab in all sorts of places that you wouldn't have thought. And yeah, follow those links. They are delightful. Okay, it looks as though we don't have any other people who wanted to talk about anything, and no one added any additional discussion. Can I just give you a minute in case someone has thought of something they would like to talk about, since we have some time? Okay, I'm going to hit stop recording now, and then we can talk about anything else. Oh, wait, Nick's hand just went up.
Okay.
Nick, the
So,
pre or post recording.
I know, right? I dropped it over in the chat. In addition to in-browser language servers, I think we might want in-browser kernels. I think there's value there. I don't know. So the light experience, like, we've already had someone ask for that, and they're trying to do really complicated, like, iframe stuff and I don't know, whatever. But there is the WebAssembly is not going anywhere. We will be seeing more things available for it. And if Jupyter is the best way to do that, a lot of the other in-browser stuff is not as cool as JupyterLab is, right? Like, we can do cool stuff. We've got the rich display system. We've got, we've already been down a bunch of those roads. I think if we were a part of that, that would be really good. And then we wouldn't need the Jupyter Lite project anymore. It would just be a different flavor of JupyterLab, a different distribution. So I don't know. This thing to think about.
Yeah, I think what the Jupyter Lite project brings that is different than what Lab brings is really just this in-browser server that we kind of try to mock so that we can start kernels in the browser. But we could imagine Lab having some changes to allow these kind of things to be plugged in more easily. Maybe it requires like a deep restructuring of like how the service manager works, for example. But I mean, it would be really cool indeed if we could have some kind of hybrid mode where people could even choose whether they just want the normal JupyterLab experience, JupyterLab plus Lite, or just a Lite static. That's it, like it is right now. So I think we will still need to be able to have this flexibility and not require, again, this Python server. But I mean, if we can, yeah, I guess you make things simpler, right, in the long term.
Yeah, and I drop a link there. I mean, to do the kernel side of the house of having in-browser kernels or just whatever kernels, if the service manager offered ways to add new sources of kernel specs, so instead of just talking to services, if there was something that could look for kernel specs, and then when you fire up that when you try and create a new session with that kernel, you need to intercept that. Those are the only two things that are needed for that side of it. Contents, that can already be done. You could already do that with iDrive and all that. So whatever, we just had to implement a lot of stuff for it. But yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah.
It might be really cool.
But Light also has this plugin system for the server, right? We're using the Fidelity extension. I guess we will also want that to work if we have this hybrid system. That's the way people bring their own kernels to the page. Yeah, another thing to consider.
Okay, folks, I am going to hit the stop recording button and give you a few minutes